Billions of people around the world watch it unfold, yet very few truly understand the hidden gears turning behind the scenes. We often treat the American electoral process like one massive, unified machine, but the reality is far more fragmented, and its constitutional quirks send ripple effects across the entire globe. History isn't just about the past, it's the key to understanding the present and the future. Welcome to CivicLore, where history, politics, and society come together through cinematic storytelling. Let's begin. To kick things off, I want you to think about what actually happens on a U.S. election day. When Americans head to the polls to choose a president, the media frames it as this single, monumental national event. But how many distinct elections do you think are actually taking place simultaneously on that exact same day? Seriously, take a quick guess in your head. The real answer, it's a staggering 10,499. That is the number of local election jurisdictions scattered across the United States. So it's not one national election, it's thousands of highly localized, distinct administrative processes happening all at once. It reveals a level of decentralization that is literally unparalleled in other modern democracies. Section 1. The Decentralized American Election. We really need to zoom in on the nuts and bolts of how American voting is structured, because honestly, you can't understand the outcomes without first understanding the machinery. The federal government actually plays a remarkably minor role here. There is no single central national election board running the show or counting the ballots. Instead, we're looking at 50 separate state elections, which are then delegated all the way down to those 10,499 local counties, cities, and townships. They handle the heavy lifting, hiring poll workers, printing ballots, the whole shebang. And the sheer scale of it is just massive. Over $10 billion is spent advocating for candidates across these incredibly complex ballots, where a single voter might have to weigh in on over 20 different contests at once, from the presidency straight down to the local sheriff. Section 2. The mechanics. Winner take all versus proportional. To grasp how votes actually translate into political power, we have to look at the baseline system used in the United States. It's called first past the post, or plurality voting. This is a winner-take-all setup. The candidate who gets the most votes in a single-member district wins the seat entirely. There's no proportional distribution based on how parties perform overall. Think about it. If you win by just one vote, you take 100% of that district's representation. The voters who chose the runner-up, they get none. Now contrast that with proportional representation, or PR. This is an alternative system utilized by about 2/3 of the world's democratic legislatures. Instead of single-member winner-take-all districts, PR uses multi-member districts. The defining feature here is the mathematical design. It aims to ensure an approximate match between a party's total national vote share and their actual seats in the legislature. It's a fundamental shift in philosophy, designed specifically to minimize the number of unrepresented voters. And here's why that matters. This structural difference dictates entirely different political behaviors. Because PR minimizes wasted votes, it fundamentally alters campaign strategy. It motivates political parties to run truly nationwide campaigns, fighting for every single vote everywhere. In a winner-take-all system, campaigns inevitably pour their massive resources almost exclusively into highly competitive swing districts, totally ignoring areas where they're safely ahead or hopelessly behind. The rules of the game completely dictate how the players behave. Section 3. Presidents versus parliaments. Let's zoom out even further. Beyond how individuals get elected, we need to look at the highest levels of global government structure. When we compare executive structures globally, we essentially see two main approaches. First, presidentialism, which defines the U.S. system. It's built on mutual independence. The executive and the legislature have separate, independent origins of power, and they serve fixed terms. They don't rely on each other to survive. On the flip side, we have parliamentarianism, which is built on mutual dependence. The executive, usually a prime minister, is drawn directly from the legislature. Their term is entirely contingent on maintaining the mutual confidence of that assembly. The 19th century constitutional scholar Walter Bagehot famously described this parliamentary dynamic as the close union, the nearly complete fusion of the executive and legislative powers. He actually called this the efficient secret of the English Constitution. You see, rather than aggressively separating powers to create friction, parliamentarism fuses them to create action. Grounding this in contemporary political science, we can see exactly how this fusion operates in practice. In a parliamentary system, the confidence vote requirement acts as a vital escape valve. If a government loses the support of the assembly, meaning if it can no longer govern effectively, it can be brought down by a vote of no confidence, which often triggers early elections. Presidential systems, locked into their fixed terms, simply lack the systemic release valve. Section 4. the global turnout gap. So we have these deeply distinct architectures, but how do these structural differences actually impact everyday citizens? Just look at voter turnout in recent national elections. Australia is soaring at nearly 90%. The average among the wealthy democracies of the OECD sits at 65%. Meanwhile, the United States, despite all its immense political spending, consistently trails below the average, sitting at just 62% turnout for the 2020 election. And mind you, that was actually a high watermark for the US in recent history. So what drives this massive turnout gap? It's not just voter apathy. It comes down to structural design. Australia and Belgium use compulsory voting laws, legally requiring participation. Plus, proportional representation systems naturally boost turnout because voters feel every single vote counts toward the national total. Administratively, countries like Germany boast over 90% registration rates simply because the state maintains the voter registries automatically. In the US, registration is a voluntary administrative burden placed directly on the individual citizen. Finally, synchronizing national and local elections like they do in Sweden vastly reduces voter fatigue.
Section 5. Measuring electoral integrity.
With all these variables in play, how do political scientists objectively measure the health of these systems? When evaluating how well elections empower citizens, using the Perceptions of Electoral Integrity Index, European proportional systems frequently dominate the top tier. Denmark ranks third globally with a score of 85. Germany sits comfortably at 10th. The United States, operating under its decentralized majoritarian system, scores a 57, ranking 73rd globally. The data points pretty objectively to the systemic challenges inherent in the American model. However, it's vital to remember that no system is a utopia. The Electoral Integrity Project consistently finds universal pain points across all democracies. Globally, regardless of whether a system is presidential or parliamentary, campaign finance regulations and media fairness always score as the weakest, most vulnerable stages of the electoral cycle. Money and media remain immense challenges absolutely everywhere. Section 6. Systemic Flexibility and Adaptation. Now, let's look at what happens to these different constitutional designs when they're placed under severe existential political stress. We can turn to the academic literature, specifically research by Sebastian M. Sayegh, to see how the organization of power affects actual, tangible policy outcomes. His research looks at sudden policy reversals with massive distributional consequences, like the likelihood of a nation rescheduling its sovereign debt. The data indicates that parliamentary democracies are notably less likely to default or reschedule their debts than presidential regimes. The institutional design directly impacts economic reliability. But the starkest contrast appears when we look at how these systems fail. Parliamentary systems certainly aren't immune to dysfunction. Just think of prolonged coalition negotiations or shifting alliances. But when they fail at the level of governance. This creates temporary policy drift, which can usually be resolved by calling snap elections. Presidential systems, however, are deeply rigid. Because terms are fixed and powers are separate, when they face total deadlock, they fail at the regime level. This creates deep constitutional crises and historically carries a much higher risk of authoritarian consolidation. Ultimately, the systemic resilience of parliamentarism lies in its flexibility. During times of immense political stress, leadership can be changed rapidly without triggering a constitutional meltdown. Those snap elections and votes of no confidence act as vital escape valves. Furthermore, because proportional representation often requires coalition governments, the system naturally mandates compromise and consensus building. It prevents the rigid institutional structure itself from becoming an obstacle to necessary change. The comparative evidence here is incredibly compelling. As researchers note, parliamentary systems don't magically prevent illiberal politics, and they certainly don't guarantee perfect governance. But what they do offer are institutional mechanisms to contest and reverse poor governance without systemic collapse. They simply provide much better odds for peaceful course correction. And that leaves us with a profound final thought. We spend so much time debating the individual candidates on our complex ballots, but so rarely do we examine the invisible architecture of the system itself. Consider this. In an increasingly uncertain and polarized global era, is peaceful course correction the highest goal we can reasonably ask from our constitutional designs? It's a structural puzzle that has defined our past and will undoubtedly shape our future. Thank you for joining us here at CivicLore, and we'll see you next time.